The Pima County Adult Probation Learn Lab is a GED study program open to all legal residents 18 and over. Serving the Tucson area with 3 sites, we offer small classes, individual instruction, and college and career advice to help guide you on your path to a greater future. To learn more, visit our website and click on the Contact Us button.
Here we are in the 3rd lesson of the TABE Mastery book on the unit covering main ideas and details. And what we are going to be talking about today is describing relationships in texts. That means in things that you are reading. We are going to identify various ways to organize information within a passage. We are going to briefly describe events during the Pearl Harbor attack. We will also list major consequences of the Pearl Harbor attack and contrast the Pearl Harbor attack with the September 11th, 2001 World Trade Center attack.
Is this mainly an English lesson or is it mainly a history lesson?
This is reading, but the content of the reading is social studies. The ADE standards that this lesson will address are written here. I'm not going to take the time to read them out to you. If you want to read them, please feel free to hit pause on your viewer and read them out. So what is text structure? We're talking about the structure of the text, how the ideas in the text interact with each other or relate to each other. Now, in the last lesson, we talked about, usually we're talking about paragraphs, but sometimes we could be talking about a whole book or a part of a book. We have a main idea, and that is supported by key details.
Is it always 3?
It is an undefined number of key details. I picked 3 because 3 is the magic number. We like to have 3, but it could be a lot of details or a few details. But these key details are going to give you more information on who, what, where, why, when, how, those questions. And when you put all of the information from these key details together, that will give you the main idea. Now, these key details are sometimes supported by minor details. They give a little bit of extra information to the key detail so you can understand it better. Generally, if you get rid of a minor detail, you can still support the main idea. In the last class, we talked about if you're looking at a building or structure, the key details are going to be the columns that are actually supporting the structure, whereas the minor details are just going to be the ornamentation, the decoration that is on the columns, just to give it more depth. Now, if you don't have enough supports for your main idea, well, think about what happens with actual buildings. So here are some examples of where we're trying to support something. Here, we want the ladder to support a person so he can change the light, and look at his supports. They're very shaky. He's running the risk of just crashing down and making an idiot of himself. Over here, well, I'm skeptical about how well this roof is going to stay up. You know, other examples, people are definitely putting a lot of faith in flimsy supports. If you do that in your writing, you may get your job done. There, I fixed it. So you have something to turn into your teacher, but you are not likely to get a passing grade. So you want to have good, strong supports.
All right, now it's not enough just to have the strong supports for your main idea. You also have to think about how you're going to arrange these supports as well. Otherwise, if you just use something that's totally random, you're going to confuse the readers and make it hard for them to follow where you're trying to take them. So the order you give the details to your readers is just as important as how strong they are. Now, there's several different ways to order these key details, and we will go into them in more detail in the rest of this lesson. The most common ones are chronological or time order, cause and effect, order of importance, and compare and contrast. These are not the only ways to order your details, but they're the ones you're most likely to encounter when you're preparing for your GED. Actually, the TABE book that you are using didn't even mention the order of importance, but I think it's very important. So I am adding it in this lesson.
All right, so we're going to start off with chronological order. And chronological order is a lot of syllables to mean time. Why do we say chronological instead of time? Because it makes us sound smarter. So when you are reading a paragraph, some of the words in the paragraph that might give you a clue that events are arranged in chronological order, clue words, may be things like first, next, last, finally, then, and then obviously dates and times, specific dates and times will be good clues as well. So let's read this. So remember, we've been talking in the last couple of lessons about Pearl Harbor. We were talking about the causes of it. Now we're getting into the attack itself. After months of planning and practice, the Japanese launched their devastating attack. At about 8 a.m., Japanese planes filled the sky over Pearl Harbor. Bombs and bullets rained onto the vessels moored below. At 8:10, an 1,800-pound bomb smashed through the deck of the battleship Arizona and landed in her forward ammunition magazine. The ship exploded and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside. Next, torpedoes pierced the shell of the battleship Oklahoma. With 400 sailors aboard, the Oklahoma lost her balance, rolled onto her side, and slipped underwater. Less than 2 hours later, the surprise attack was over, and every battleship in Pearl Harbor, the Arizona, Oklahoma, California, West Virginia, Utah, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Nevada, had sustained significant damage. There may be some vocabulary in here that you're not familiar with. So the word devastating, what does that word mean?
Oh, I have a cousin that uses it. It means like really, really beautiful. Like she'll say, I look devastating today.
Oh, okay. I had heard things of like Jeremy Renner is devastatingly gorgeous.
So I was right. Okay, cool.
But what does that mean? Because that is figurative use of the word. So when we say Jeremy Renner is devastatingly gorgeous, what it means is you see him and you are just so shocked by his gorgeousness that you fall down on the floor.
So it means really, really, really pretty. But I'm confused because I don't know why the attack would be pretty. I mean, I guess a lot of colors.
All right. Does really pretty fit in this sense?
No.
What do you think might fit instead? What's another word you would use to describe an attack?
Like terrible?
I don't know if I agree with the other student. I mean, I could really see the Japanese like watching their bombs fall going, wow, this is beautiful.
Why is it beautiful?
Because they wanted to see their enemy get destroyed.
Destroyed, there we go. And that's where the real meaning of the word comes from. If you read through the rest of this paragraph and you're reading about all this damage that is happening, that can kind of give you a clue when you go back to this first sentence to what devastating may mean. A couple of things to keep in mind here. First, yes, you've probably heard the word devastating in the sense that we were talking about, but that doesn't mean that's the only meaning that the word has. Ask yourself as you read the paragraph, does that meaning that I have in mind actually make sense? Another thing is you don't have to have the meaning of it right away. Go ahead and read through the paragraph and see if there are clues throughout the paragraph that will help you. When you go back and read the word again, you can piece together devastating. Well, if we look here and see references to the ship exploded and sank and all these bombs smashed through the deck, you start to get a clue. Devastating means it caused an awful lot of damage. All right, another word you may not be familiar with, moored. The vessels are moored. What do you do with vessels when you're not at sea?
Oh, I just figured they misspelled lowered.
Well, would you lower a vessel?
Well, they're below, so I figured they're lowered.
Yeah, but that would be repetitively redundant. So the vessels are already below, so you don't need to lower them anymore.
Oh, that makes sense.
So if the vessels are below and we're in Pearl Harbor, we're not out in the ocean.
But when they dropped the bombs, it lowered them, like they were floating on the surface, and then they got bombed, and then they got lowered further below.
But the first thing is the bombs happened. These were on the vessels that were already moored below.
Oh.
So, all right.
Teacher,
Yes, ma'am.
what's a vessel and what's moored?
Vessel. Ah, good point. What is a vessel?
I've heard of nuclear
Like
vessels.
a cup or a container of some kind?
Yeah. So this is another one of those words that can have lots of meanings because we talk about blood vessels.
Ah,
So usually the general meaning is a container, but it's often used to mean ship. And it can be a very generic word for ship. If you're in the Navy, you can get in trouble for calling a battleship a boat. There's a difference between a boat and a ship. But if you want to keep your bases covered, just use the word vessel. Vessel can mean anything that floats on water. You look further on, I've got Forward Ammunition Magazine. This is something I don't think you even really need to know exactly what a Forward Ammunition Magazine is. What is ammunition?
Well,
bullets?
sure.
Bullets.
And sure, and I've got another cousin that he gets a magazine every month about ammunition, but I don't understand, like, were these magazines even in the same place as the ships?
Well, they were obviously in the forward part of the ship, and they caused a fire because magazines are flammable.
Oh, okay.
All right, ammunition magazine, again, magazine is one of those words that can have several different meanings, and so what we're talking about is just the place where all the ammunition is stored. But even if you don't know all of that, the key word is ammunition. You may not know exactly what they're talking about, but you can follow from that, okay, it got hit. What happened after that? The ship exploded. If there are any other words in here that you don't know, feel free to bring them up.
I'm a little confused by pierced. I mean,
Pierced. Yeah.
like that's what they do, like in tattoo parlors, right?
Yes.
So they're talking about the sailors?
So the torpedoes pierced. What did they pierce?
The shell
The shell of what?
of the battleship? But are
Okay.
they talking about the people? Like, why would they even do that?
Well, you don't have to just pierce a person. You're not piercing a person in the first place. You are piercing a specific part of a person.
Sure.
So pierced ears, what does that mean?
They punch a hole through your ear?
Exactly. So pierce means to punch a hole through. So the torpedo punched a hole through the shell of the battleship.
Oh, okay.
So again, you can sometimes take the knowledge that you already have and find a connection between it and what you're reading. Now let's look at this. I've already told you in advance, this is an example of chronological order. Let's look for some clue words that tells us this might be chronological orders. Do you see any time-related words here? What?
8 a.m. That's a time.
So we've got at 8 a.m. something happened. Any more?
Well, then there's 8:10, 10 minutes
Okay.
later.
Okay, do you see any more clue words that tell you we are ordering things in order of when they happened?
Well, I don't know if this counts because it's not like a time, like 8 a.m. and 8:10 are times, but this really isn't. But how about the word next?
Yeah,
Like, it's
I like
not a time though.
it. Kind of is, and this is actually one of the clue words that I listed.
Oh.
So first this happened, and then next that happened. So we are showing they didn't all happen at once. They happened one at a time. So that is definitely a very good clue word there. It doesn't always mean time, but it should raise your suspicions. Any other time words?
Looking ahead, I see a word later.
Okay.
Less than 2
Oh,
hours
that's
later.
important. 2 hours.
Yeah, so
Hours is time.
yes, definitely, less than 2 hours later. So yes, we are talking about another area of time. So it looks to me like these events are arranged in order of time.
I'm seeing another word. I wonder if it's related also.
Oh,
You said less than 2 hours later, the surprise attack was over. That sounds to me like the end, like we came to the end of this time frame here.
okay, that's actually a really good point. So I don't know if over all by itself would tell you this is arranged in chronological order, but it's definitely a very good clue word that we are looking at the last item in this series. Thanks for pointing that out because I had completely missed that.
It almost seems like it would have to be combined with was to have that sense.
That's true.
I have another question.
Yes.
You said this happened in Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii, but I see all these state names here: Arizona, Oklahoma, California. I'm a little confused.
These are names of battleships.
Wow.
In fact, battleships are always named after states.
Oh, I always thought the Japanese attacked Tennessee.
No, Tennessee is way too far away. So they
But they have
attacked the
airplanes.
Tennessee. Yeah, but the airplanes don't fly that far. All right, so the clue words that you identified were at about 8 a.m., 8:10, next, and less than 2 hours. Okay, we can use that to identify the key details. What happened at 8 a.m.? So let's go find those things first. Key detail. What was the first thing that happened at 8 a.m.? Do you want me to show you the paragraph again?
Yes.
So what happened at 8 a.m.?
Japanese planes filled the sky.
They filled the sky.
But not in Tennessee.
But not in Tennessee, just where, what part of the sky?
Over Pearl Harbor.
Over Pearl Harbor. Now, when I write down these details, I'm going to lose a lot of time if I write these details word for word. Japanese planes filled the sky over Pearl Harbor. You might want to put this in your own words. You might find a much quicker way to write it. I just wrote Japanese flew overhead at 8 a.m. Japanese planes. So first detail, 8 o'clock, Japanese planes overhead. All right, what was the next time word?
8:10.
8:10. And what happened at 8:10?
I don't remember.
That's why I'm showing you the paragraph again.
A bomb smashed through the Arizona battleship.
Yes.
And ignited the stack of magazines.
Yes. A bomb hit the Arizona. And again, you don't have to write every word that is there. We're just trying to identify the major details and try to summarize them. So I just put a large bomb or a huge bomb hit the Arizona, the ship that named Arizona, and landed in the ammunition storage. What do you think is going to happen if a bomb lands in a bunch of gunpowder?
That sounds dangerous.
Yes. Why?
Because the gunpowder could like catch on fire.
Yeah, and do bad things.
That'd be an even
But
bigger.
the boats are made out of metal, right? So they'd be okay.
Well, they get awfully hot, and they may not withstand the force of the blast from the gunpowder, because the gunpowder isn't just going to catch fire; it's going to
explode.
And
It's a
that
really big
force
bomb.
could punch holes. Next keyword we have is next. What happened next?
Torpedoes pierced the battleship Oklahoma.
Okay. You want to put that in your own language, or was that your own language?
Yeah, torpedoes punched a hole in the Oklahoma battleship.
I like that.
Nice.
I was less specific than you were. I just said the torpedoes hit the battleship. Punched a hole is definitely much more accurate. And
Well, it's
what?
because you helped me understand pierced.
Okay. What was the last thing that happened? Less than 2 hours later.
It was over.
And what else?
I mean,
all the
that's-
battleships were damaged.
Yeah, so it was all over in 2 hours. And yeah, I think this bit is really important. All these ships sustained damage. So it's nice that the attack is over. Good. But what happened? I mean, what was the result of the attack? All this damage. Less than 2 hours later, it was all over with every battleship damaged. Okay. So we've got these major details here. So what are the details again? Let's look through it. Japanese planes flew overhead. A bomb hit the Arizona and landed in the ammunition storage. Torpedoes hit the battleship Oklahoma. Less than 2 hours later, it was all over with every battleship damaged. Can you come up with a major idea that summarizes or that includes all of those thoughts?
Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor.
I love it. Put that at the top. I used fancy words. The Japanese launched their devastating attack. I liked yours better. Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And it was a very damaging attack. Now we can fill out the rest. What are some of the minor details that happened?
They lost their magazines.
They lost their magazines. They didn't pay their subscription. Okay. Do we have anything? 8 a.m. Oh, yes, we do.
Vessels moored.
Yeah, but what happened to the moored vessels?
It was raining.
Yeah, what was raining?
It was raining bombs and bullets.
It was raining bombs and bullets. That's worse than dogs and cats.
For
So
that song, It's Raining Men.
I don't know that one.
Wow. We will have to bring you to America sometime.
So a supporting or a minor detail for Japanese planes flew overhead was bombs and bullets hit the ship.
Oh,
Okay.
they dropped the rain word. I like
Yeah,
rain.
I was being sloppy. Now, why do you suppose they used the word rain? Bombs and bullets rain down.
Because it's from airplanes, so it's coming out of the sky.
It's coming out of the sky.
But raindrops are a lot. They come down like a shower. It's bunches of them.
There's no way you could run between them. What was the next key detail? So a bomb hit the Arizona and landed in the ammunition storage. And what was the supporting detail to that? So we've got the bomb hit the battleship of the Arizona and landed in her forward ammunition storage up here. And what happened after that?
Well, the ship sank with 1,000 men.
Yes. Okay.
So is that men like people or men like males? Because somebody told me it could be used either way.
It could, and I actually thought about that. But at this time, there were no women in combat. So it's very unlikely that there were any women on board the ship.
Oh, well, that's good.
So it probably was actually literally just men. So the ship exploded and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside, which accounted for half of the losses in Pearl Harbor. All right, the next thing that happened, torpedoes pierced the shell of the Oklahoma. And what gives more information to what happened there?
Well, this time we lost 400 people when it sank.
We lost 400 people there. How did we lose them? Did the torpedo hit those 400 people?
No, it sank the boat.
It sank the boat. It hit the ship and it made it sink. So the Oklahoma sank with 400 sailors. That gives a little bit more information to the torpedoes hit. Now this last one,
Oklahoma, okay.
I'm going to keep that in there. Could you please sing that a little louder? Did you hear it, Leslie?
Oh, yeah. Oklahoma, Oklahoma.
All right. There is a little bit of extra detail to this last one. Less than 2 hours later, it was all over with all the battleships damaged.
Well, the detail was the list of all the ships.
Exactly. All of the battleships that were located at Pearl Harbor were seriously damaged. Now you notice here, this minor detail, it didn't get its own sentence. It interrupted the sentence. So less than 2 hours later, the attack was over and every battleship in Pearl Harbor had sustained significant damage. That's the main sentence. And then we interrupted the sentence to tell you the names of all those ships. Now, I would argue these other minor details are really not minor at all. In fact, I think they're important. Japanese planes flew overhead. Who cares if they just flew overhead? What was important is that the bombs and the bullets hit the ships. At 8:10, a bomb hit the Arizona and landed in the ammunition storage. What's really important about that is what I'm calling the minor detail. It may not be really fair for me to call these minor details. They're more like subsequent details, they are actually providing some pretty important information. Something else that you might notice, the bomb hit the Arizona. What was the result of that?
The ship exploded.
The ship exploded. So here we have a definite cause effect going on.
I thought you said this was chronological.
Yes. Isn't that frustrating? Sometimes when you see information organized in a paragraph, you may have a combination of these different ways to organize information. Our main points are all in time order, but then within there we've got some subpoints, and there we have them arranged in cause and effect order. So we don't have the ship exploded and sank happening first. It is a result of the bomb hitting. It's also time ordered. The bomb hit first, then the ship exploded. Cause and effect is also time order. It has to be. The cause always happens before the effect does. But not all things that happen in time order are cause and effect.
Is it also compare and contrast? Because like the Arizona got bombed, but the Oklahoma got torpedoed.
Possibly, but there's a difference between cause and effect and compare and contrast. Cause and effect, by its very nature, is also chronological. It is time-based. Something has to happen first in order to cause something else. You don't need time in order to compare and contrast things. There might be time involved, but it is not necessary. To answer your question here, there are definitely similarities and differences between what happened to the Arizona and the Oklahoma, and you could certainly write a paragraph on them, but I don't see the writer trying to make a point of that here.
Again, here we see a little bit of cause effect. The torpedoes hit the Oklahoma. We wouldn't really care, except that that made the Oklahoma sink with a whole bunch of people on it. So let's move on to cause and effect. So an action happens, there's a reaction that happens. I smacked Lance. Lance said, ouch. Some key words or clue words would be as a result, therefore, since, because of, the reason for, led to, due to. So these can often be hints that we're looking at cause-effect relationships. All right, so here is a brief passage. Does anyone want to read this instead of me?
Sure, I'll read it. On Battleship Row, Japanese torpedo planes blew holes in the Oklahoma, which quickly listed toward one side. Warship fuel poured into the harbor, and as a result, an inferno erupted. The whole place was on fire, a witness said. The water was burning because the oil was on fire. Little tiny one.
Yeah, so the little tiny one, again, is a note that if you go down to the bottom of the page, you'll find out where I got this from.
Oh.
You always have to give credit when you get information from somebody else. You can't take credit for their work. Plus, your reader might want to know where you got it from and read that whole source. So we've got a couple of possible words that I wouldn't expect you to know. Listed is very much of a water term or a sea term. But we're saying that the Oklahoma listed toward one side. So we've got this toward one side bit. Can you guess what listing would mean?
Like leaning?
That's my best guess, yes. And we don't really need more detail than that. Okay, inferno erupted. Well, there, you can kind of guess what it means. First of all, looking at what we've got before the inferno erupted, what do you think is going to happen if fuel pours into a harbor?
I think it's going to float, because I think it's like when you have oil and vinegar, like the oil always floats to the top.
That is true. And on its own, yes, it would just float. But when you have lots of hot things around the floating fuel, what do you think happens? What happens if
it gets really hot?
What happens if you drop a match in a puddle of gasoline?
Oh, then it's going to catch on fire.
Boom! All right. And then we follow that with the whole place was on fire. The water was burning because the oil was on fire. That explains what inferno is. So an inferno is an enormous, massive fire. All right. First of all, do you see any cause-effect clue words in this passage?
Oh, as a result, it's down.
As a result, yes. Now, in this particular one, I only looked at one cause-effect.
But there's because also, and that's on your list.
Where's because?
The water was burning because the oil was on fire.
I didn't point that out because I was waiting for somebody else to point it out.
Oh,
Very good.
thank you.
Good work, Lance.
I have one of the causes, fuel spilled out of the ship. What was the effect of that?
Just
An
go
inferno.
Disco Inferno. The harbor caught fire. Yes, there are other cause effects here. Another one, the water was burning because the oil was on fire. Okay, there, I would call that an inverted cause and effect, meaning the effect is first, the cause is second. You can order them that way as long as you are clear which event causes what.
Do we have to call it effect and cause then?
I would call it cause and effect. One is causing, the other is affecting. Sometimes you'll have a chain of causes and effects.
Ooh.
We actually see that here because what happened first? The holes got blown in the Oklahoma. That made it lean to one side, which allowed the fuel to pour into the water. And with all the hot stuff going around, boom, it caught fire. So we've got a chain of causes and effects here. But I have a more elaborate one.
And because of that, the water was burning.
And therefore the water was burning. Can I get another volunteer to read?
Oh, I'll be happy to wait. Then a fourth bomb hit the Arizona with devastating finality. Dropped from a high-altitude plane, the armor-piercing bomb blasted through the forward deck. This caused 1 million pounds of gunpowder to be ignited, which led to a massive fireball shooting flames 500 feet high. Wow. By some accounts, the massive ship jumped up as much as 20 feet. Wow. The Arizona, mortally wounded, therefore began to sink minutes later. As a result, the multitudes of sailors and Marines trapped below deck drowned, accounting for most of the ship's 1,177 fatalities.
All right, devastating finality. Okay, again, we talked about devastating. It means completely destroying. Oh, another use of the word devastated. I was devastated when I heard the news. What does that mean?
It means, oh, okay, so it means you were destroyed?
Yes,
Really sad.
I just was unable to function anymore. Completely destroyed. We've got the word ignited over here. What do you think that might mean?
Does it kind of sounds like ignition in my car?
Okay,
It started it.
started it. Yeah,
my
well,
car. That's right.
what's happening when you turn the ignition? Besides it just starting, what's happening inside the car?
The gasoline,
Something. What happens to the gasoline?
it goes into the piston.
Right. But
And,
before
oh,
that,
there's a spark. There's a spark
The
plug
spark.
or a spark.
yes, a car works because it's a bunch of controlled explosions of gasoline. These explosions have to be ignited, which is what the spark is for. That gives you a little bit of a clue of what this word might mean. Let's also look in the rest of the sentence. So we've got this fireball coming from the gunpowder. So what do you think, if you ignite gunpowder and get a fireball, what do you think ignite means?
Start the fire.
Start the fire.
Blow it up.
We didn't start the fire.
Know that. Okay.
Mortally wounded. Any idea what that means? Spanish speakers may have an advantage here because I think there's a very similar word in Spanish.
In Spanish, mortal means like deadly. Morir is to die.
Okay. We've
Yeah.
got this root, mort. We have mortals, mere mortals. These are people who can die. If you are immortal, what does that mean?
Ah, you live forever.
You don't die. So mortally wounded, what would mortally wounded mean then?
You're wounded and you die.
Yes, you are wounded so badly that you are not going to survive. So the Arizona was just destroyed, damaged so badly there was no fixing it. And then we've got this word multitudes. What happens when you multiply?
Oh, you make numbers bigger?
You make things bigger, there's more. So multitudes of sailors.
Well, there was 1,000 people on there.
Also, when you combine multitudes with accounting for the ship's 1,177 fatalities, if 1,177 people die all at once in the same place, is that a lot?
Oh, that's huge.
I think that's a lot. So
It's horrible.
multitudes just means lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. All right. So what's the first thing that happened?
A bomb hit the Arizona.
A bomb hit the Arizona. It was dropped from a high altitude plane and blasted through the deck. Let's look for some cause-effect words.
Ignited gunpowder.
Was that a cause-effect word?
That's
Let's identify those.
cause
Good.
gunpowder to be ignited.
Okay. So that is a good clue word. So yes, the key word here is this cause. What did it cause?
Gunpowder to catch on fire.
Gunpowder to catch on fire. I hope that's what I wrote. So the cause was the bomb hit Arizona. The result was 1 million pounds of gunpowder ignited. What did that cause?
Fireball.
A fireball, okay? This effect, it had its own effect. So the effect now becomes a cause, and it has its own effect. Let's look for the next clue word. I kind of already showed it to you.
Which led?
Which led to. So that's going to be another cause-effect word. And what was the effect of lighting the gunpowder?
Fireball.
The fireball. So here's the effect. We had a massive fireball that shot flames 500 feet high and lifted the ship 20 feet into the air. All right, let's look for some other cause-effect words because I think I've got more. So we've got the ship jumped up 20 feet, the Arizona mortally wounded.
Oh, as a result.
We did that one, I think.
No, as a result, multitudes of sailors.
Yeah, we got one before that though.
Oh, therefore.
Therefore, you got this giant fireball, the ship jumped in the air. I guess all of that kind of mortally wounded the ship, which made it sink. So we've got another keyword, therefore. And what was the effect of this giant fireball? Well, bottom line, the ship began to sink. Then we mentioned already the other keyword. So as a result, and what was the result?
1177 guys died.
Yes. So a bunch of people were trapped and drowned. So as a result is our keyword. Our ship began to sink is now a cause that had its own consequences. And the effect, trapped sailors and Marines drowned. What's the main idea?
A bomb sank the ship.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think. So a bomb totaled the Arizona and killed nearly 200.
I like your choice of verb there, totaled, because, like, no, you can't repair this. You're going to have to just go out and buy a new one.
Here is the Arizona today. So you can see it here underwater. We have a memorial museum built over it, and you obviously have to get there by boat. Fun fact, the Arizona is still leaking oil to the harbor.
Wow.
And this gives you the source where I got all that information from. So if you went to this website, you would actually get to where I cribbed it from. Order of importance. So most important to least important, or you can start off with least important to most important. It depends on.
But I've got to do one of those two things. I can't start out with middle important and move out from there.
You would have to have a very good reason for doing so.
Okay.
It's hard to come up with an idea. I mean, there might be a reason why you had to, but it's not advisable. So you might want to start off with your most important reason because you're afraid you're going to lose your audience. And so you need to wow them right now, get their attention, and then you can finish off with the less important ones. Other times you can want to build your case. Okay, so one reason is because such and such. Okay, but there's more. You give them an even stronger reason, and wow, you've really hit their defenses now. And you finish off with, here is a devastatingly important reason for whatever. You've ended with the grand finale.
So what are some clue words for order of importance?
So you may have things like first, second. Those sometimes show up in chronological order as well. So you can see them in a couple different categories.
We've also got phrases like for one thing, for another thing, in addition, also, moreover, furthermore, last, finally. Also comparison words such as worse or more importantly, etc.
All right, let's start off. This is a little bit longer. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a pivotal moment in the U.S.'s involvement in World War II. For one thing, the Navy suffered significant damage. 19 ships and 300 airplanes were damaged or destroyed, as well as dry docks and airfields. Worse was the human cost. Approximately 8,000 people were wounded and 2,403 were killed. Do you see any clue words here that would show order of importance?
I mean, I definitely see the worst word.
Yeah, so we've got worse over here. These are, comparison words such as worse, more important. So we've got this one thing, all the ships that were destroyed, but even worse. So now we're getting to more firepower, the human cost. Okay. There is one more that we have in here for earlier in that paragraph.
Is it for one thing?
For one thing, yeah. So we're starting off. This was a very important moment in our involvement in World War II. For one thing, our Navy took a very big hit. That's important. Even worse, the human cost. So here we are ordering things, having them in order of importance. We start off with, the ships, all that stuff, that was pretty bad. But when you think about how many people were killed, that's certainly a lot worse. However,
mistakes made by the Japanese brought on unexpected consequences that were even more significant. First, while Japan had managed to damage the U.S. Navy, they failed to destroy vital fuel depots, shipyards, repair shops, and submarine docks. Many of the ships that were damaged or even sunk were able to be repaired and sent back into action. More importantly, the Japanese had failed to neutralize their most important target, the U.S.'s 3 aircraft carriers, which happened to be out at sea on maneuvers. Finally, because of a delay, Japan failed to declare war on the U.S. before the attack, which infuriated the Americans even more than the attack itself, and all but ensured the committed involvement of a powerful country with an enormous industrial might, not just in the Pacific, but in the European war as well. This gave the Allies some of the additional strength needed ultimately to defeat the Axis powers.
all right, thank you. So I identified 3 clue words. We've got first, that we were going to talk about this bit, but even more important than that is whatever I happen to mention here. And then finally, we've got this last thing, which was ultimately the most important thing that resulted from it. Within that, we've got a couple of subsections. So we've got, while Japan had managed to destroy the Navy, they failed to destroy some vital pieces of infrastructure. Also, things that they did manage to harm were able to be repaired. So there are really 2 items included in this first topic. They didn't get all their targets, and some of the targets that they did get were repairable. So let's look at how this is organized. So I've already underlined the clue words. So we've got things like for one thing, worse. So these are for the 2 paragraphs together.
And that's why persistence is a tenet of the application of air power. That's what the Japanese lacked.
Can you explain that thought a little bit more, please?
Sure. So when you attack something by air, exactly right. In a lot of cases, it can be repaired, or there are workarounds, and you're attacking a thinking enemy who's going to try to figure that stuff out. So you can't just attack once and say, we knocked out the airfield, so we're done. You have to have some kind of persistence where you're going back and thwarting the repair efforts or the workarounds. And if you don't, they will repair or work around.
So, okay, that's a good point. That's also related to studying. It's not enough to do something just once. You're going to have to go over it many times before you've really got that subject knocked out. In this particular case, the Japanese, at the end of this attack, argued among themselves, should we stay and keep attacking them some more, or should we turn around and go home now? The admiral who was in charge of this mission, Nagumo, was very heavily criticized because he decided, let's quit while we're ahead and go home. I've got to take care of this Navy. We are very vulnerable while we're out here. We've hit our enemy. Let's quit while we're ahead.
I think he made a defensible decision there because there are 3 enemy aircraft carriers in the vicinity.
And we don't know where they are, and they could come back and get us. Yes, I think it was a very difficult decision. I certainly understand why he did it. I'm glad he made that decision, because if he hadn't, we might have been knocked out of the game. But a lot of people in Japan were mad at him because he didn't finish the job.
In a way, he's got a game where his advantage is also his disadvantage. The thing he wanted to do was to knock out the enemy aircraft carriers, because that would be a devastating, almost insurmountable challenge to the Americans. But it's true in reverse. If his carriers get sunk, that's a devastating, insurmountable blow to the Japanese.
They invested a large percentage of their carrier fleet into this mission. It was definitely a risk.
It's kind of like a bear also. If you're going to go after a bear, you better make sure you kill it.
Yes.
Because otherwise, he's going to come after you.
I mean, if you follow that analogy, it's like the Japanese killed the bear cubs. And the question is, are we going to hang around and try to find Mama Bear?
Or
and he's like, maybe not.
Let's get out of here while we're still alive.
Right.
Unfortunately, Mama Bear went hunting for him. All right, so we already identified the first paragraph. So what were these consequences of the attack? We talked about the U.S. So against the U.S., we had damage to property. So that's one item. We lost a bunch of ships, more airplanes. We lost dry docks. We lost airfields. We definitely lost a lot of stuff.
I mean, those are substantial numbers. There is no Navy in the world that won't be pretty crippled by losing 19 ships and 300 airplanes.
And again, this gets back to a concept that we talked about in the last lesson. Nagumo was old school. He, with a lot of the commanders in the U.S. as well, thinking in terms of sea battles are still fought by battleships. And when you've lost that many battleships and destroyers and other ships, you're pretty well hurt. But the tide of tactics was changing. We're now going into carriers. We lost a whole bunch of stuff that is becoming obsolete anyway. So the U.S. certainly made a mistake in not understanding the threat of the Japanese carriers, but the Japanese were taking an awful risk by leaving the Americans' carriers untouched. So we've had enormous damage to property, and even worse, we've got the human losses. Again, these items are listed in order of importance. It's bad that we had 1,000 wounded. It's even worse that we had this many killed, 2,400.
I mean, it's worse, but to me, it's less significant because of, a battle in which 3,000 people are killed. I mean, that's a big battle, but that happens all the time. But
not in peacetime.
Well, sure.
And I think that was the real trigger. That's why it was so horrendous. If we lost 3,000 soldiers in the battle during the war, well, we're expecting that. And that kind of leads us into the second paragraph, the consequences that were against Japan. So one of the things they did, they failed to neutralize the U.S. They left a lot of key items still working. The carriers were unharmed, and a lot of things were not destroyed enough that you couldn't repair them. I think most of the ships were eventually repaired. Even worse was the psychological effect, this delay in getting the declaration of war out. It was originally the Japanese plan to deliver a message to the U.S. Embassy of, our negotiations have failed. We cannot come up with an agreement. Therefore, a state of war exists between us. And then a half an hour later, the attack is supposed to happen. It didn't work that way. There were some delays, and that message did not come to the embassy until after the attack. And getting the involvement into the U.S. then led to the defeat of the Axis powers, which is most definitely the most important consequence of this event. You notice that these two paragraphs are placed in order of importance. So it was important that the U.S. took heavy damage. It was far more important that the attack led to the U.S. getting involved in the war and helping change the course of it. Yamamoto was the Japanese commander who designed this attack in the first place. He was pretty specific that to succeed, they were going to have to completely destroy the American Navy. They were going to have to get the carriers and the fuel depots. When that failed, he knew that this attack was ultimately going to do more harm than good. Supposedly, he said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Now, I'm going to give you the disclaimer. We don't know for sure that he said that. In the movie Tora, 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 which I referred to a lot last time, he says this at the end, but nobody can actually point to where he actually said it. It is certainly something that he could be believed to have said.
So I really need to put this out here for both you and everyone listening virtually. If anybody is shopping and they see a jacket like that, I need a jacket like that.
But this quote is actually very important because even though we don't know for sure that he said it historically, it gets referred to a lot when we talk about the Pearl Harbor attack. So just for your general historical literacy, it's good to be familiar with this quote.
So personal comment, I have always been a fan of Yamamoto because as a fellow airman, that's a guy who understood air power at a time when nobody understood air power.
Does history repeat itself? What event am I portraying here with these pictures?
9/11.
Right, the September 11th attack that happened 20 years ago this year. The September 11th attack has often been compared to the Pearl Harbor attack because there are similarities. So here we're going to be talking about comparing, contrasting similarities and differences. And these are actually really fun. I love to talk about how things are alike and how they're different. So comparison clue words. So we're going to be looking for things like similar to, alike, likewise, as well as sometimes both or neither. These are showing how two different items are similar to each other. Contrast, we're going to be using a lot of clue words like on the one hand, on the other hand. Sometimes we'll use however, more than, unlike, although, whereas, while, but. Again, these lists are not complete. There are plenty of other words that you can use, but these are definitely.
However, and other conjunctive adverbs.
Yes.
Thank you.
However, actually shows up as a clue word for some of the other organization techniques too. So just because you see it in one list doesn't mean it doesn't exist in another list. All right, so let's look at comparison.
The attack on Pearl Harbor may remind you of a more recent surprise attack, the attack on the World Trade Center and Pentagon on September 11th, 2001. Both attacks occurred on the U.S. soil, caused the deaths of thousands of Americans, and took most people completely by surprise. The attacks were also similar in that there had been warning signs months or even years before that were ignored or not taken seriously enough. Another way in which they were alike is that they infuriated the American people and mobilized the country to declare war.
Thank you. So I underlined some words that show that we are pointing out what's similar.
I think you missed one.
Did I?
Yeah, go all the way up. I think the phrase may remind you is telling you that these two things are similar.
Good point. Didn't even think about that. Actually, the may, I think, is a double-edged sword. That tells me it may remind you. I'm hearing a but coming after that. So that's telling me I'm going to hear a bunch of similarities between these events. I'm betting you're going to follow up with a bunch of differences between these two events as well. Good catch. So what are the clue words and phrases here? Both similar, another way in which they're alike. Let's look at contrast.
So now we're going to look at the differences between these two attacks. Anyone want to read it?
Sure, I'll take it.
Thank you.
However,
That's my big butt.
It's been recorded, we can move on. However, the two attacks had many differences as well. On the one hand, with the clearly marked Japanese planes, there was never any question who was behind the bombing of Pearl Harbor. On the other hand, it took U.S. intelligence officials days to clearly ascertain who led the September 11th attacks. Furthermore, unlike the Pearl Harbor attack, which was directed at a military target, the September 11th attack killed mostly civilians in the World Trade Center. A final difference between the two events can be seen in the aftermath. Unlike World War II, which lasted for 4 years against a very specific enemy, the war that the U.S. entered after September 11th is still going on and is directed against a poorly defined and ever-changing enemy of terrorist cells scattered over multiple countries.
All right.
Although the axis was multiple countries, so in that respect.
That's true. Okay, so now we are looking at how they are different, and I've underlined these contrast words. It's also possible you could argue that in talking about these contrast items, so here's a difference, and here's a difference. Those three differences were ordered in order of importance. I started off with the most obvious one. We knew who did it, but more important was that a lot of civilians were killed in the second attack. And a final difference, which ultimately is really a big one, this thing is still going on. You can make a case for them being ordered in order of importance.
Under both Democratic and Republican administrations. Right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
You know, September 11th happened in 2001.
Where we had a
There-
Republican,
Right, a Republican and a Democrat and a Republican and now another Democrat, and
And
it
it's still going
just
on.
keeps going.
yes. All right. Now these compare contrast paragraphs, it really helps if you work with lists here. So what are the things that are similar between Pearl Harbor and September 11th? Well, something that's very similar, obviously, it occurred on U.S. soil. One happened in Hawaii, which was a U.S. territory at the time. The other one happened in New York City. They both killed thousands of Americans. They were both surprises, but they both had missed some important warning signs. Pearl Harbor, the warning signs only went back a few months. September 11th, you can argue that there were warning signs going back years. Both attacks infuriated the American people. It's a surprise that killed lots of people. That's going to infuriate us, and that provoked us into a war. We've got the Pearl Harbor on one side, the September 11th on the other, and these are the items that are in common. Now, how are they different? So again, I've got the Pearl Harbor on one side of the chart, September 11th on the other, and you're going to notice the contrast stays within this row. So Pearl Harbor, one way they're different. Pearl Harbor, we knew who was behind the attack. September 11th, it took us a few days before we figured it out. Another difference was in the target. Pearl Harbor was mostly military, whereas September 11th was mostly civilian.
And along with that, although the declaration of war was a problem, but you could really say Pearl Harbor, aside from the declaration of war problem, was a legal act,
Okay.
whereas September 11th is on any standards a criminal activity.
Yes, yes. And then a final difference, we knew exactly when we were done with the war with Japan, whereas the war against terror, we're still not exactly sure who it is we're fighting. It's always changing. It's a moving target. We never really defined when do we know we're done. Let's look at these last two paragraphs. How are the ideas in the paragraph organized? Now, when you do your practice in your TABE book, you're going to have much simpler paragraphs than this one. I have it at this level of difficulty because when you are working on the GED, you will be working with difficult paragraphs. So let's go ahead and try to plow through these paragraphs and see what sense we can make of it.
I'll take the first one.
Okay.
On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, launching the Second World War in Europe. Across the Atlantic, the United States showed no appetite for getting involved in the European conflict. For 2 years, the United States maintained its policy of non-intervention, although they did provide material assistance to the Allied forces facing Hitler's armies. Then came December 7th, 1941. It can be argued that the events of that day and those that followed made December of 1941 the most momentous month of World War II. I vote for chronological.
Why?
Because we start with September of 1939, which is the earliest event anywhere in that paragraph,
Okay.
followed by the next 2 years. And then we get December of 1941, which would be after that.
Mm-hmm.
So 39, 2 years, December 41. So earliest, middle, latest, it's chronological.
Okay, so you've made a very strong case for chronological. We've definitely got a lot of clue words and phrases for chronological. That doesn't mean that other forms of organization are not also there, but do you see any clues for other forms of organization? Do you see things like on the other hand or furthermore?
Well, I mean, I do see a cause and effect in the first sentence because Hitler invaded and that caused the Second World War.
Okay, but did that cause the next thing? Did Hitler's invading Poland cause a policy of non-intervention by the U.S.?
No, in fact, it's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah, so we're not really seeing a strong case for cause and effect. In this particular case, it seems like the chronological is the strongest form of organization. So we've got on September 1st, Hitler invaded Poland. For 2 years, the U.S. mostly stayed out of it. Then came December 7th, 1941. And that's probably going to be a segue into the next paragraph. Leslie, do you feel up to reading this?
Certainly. When Japan launched its attack on the United States, the Americans immediately declared war against the attackers, triggering the Mutual Defense Clause of the Tripartite Pact between Germany, Italy, and Japan. Hitler now had no choice but to declare war on the United States. America's long-standing policy of isolationism was officially dead. Over the course of 4 days, December 1941 became a pivotal time in World War II. It was in this month that the Allies began to receive desperately needed assistance in Europe, and a new theater of the war was launched. Without U.S. involvement, the war might have had a very different outcome. Japan may have continued taking over territories in China and Southeast Asia, and Hitler's forces may have been able to seize even more of Europe.
All right, thank you. Now, there's a lot of vocabulary in here that I do not expect you to know. I'm going to try to argue that we can still get the main points of this paragraph, even without knowing all the vocabulary, and we can probably come up with some educated guesses. Long-standing, well, if you've been standing there for a long time, it's been going on for a while. So America had this policy for a long time of what? Isolationism. Okay, if you know the word isolate, you can figure out isolationism. It means we want to be isolated, left alone.
We didn't want to get involved.
Right. Now, that does depend on you knowing this word isolate, which you may or may not know. So if you don't know this root word, you probably would have to stop, go look up what does this mean to see what they're going to be talking about. However, we had been talking in the previous paragraph about non-intervention. We didn't want to get involved. So that might help as a clue to talk about the policy we've had for a long time is stay out of it. Some of these other items in here, triggering the Mutual Defense Clause of the Tripartite Pact between Germany, Italy, and Japan. Tripartite pact, you are probably not going to know what that means, although you might know what a pact is. Have you ever made a pact with a friend of yours? Usually it means, I'm going to do this if you do that, or we are both going to agree not to do this thing, or whatever.
I think the Japanese were supernaturally lucky for Germany honoring that agreement, because Hitler was not well known for honoring the promises he made.
Experience shows the Führer's guarantees guarantee nothing.
Yes, and in fact, I had read somewhere else that had the reverse situation happened, Japan would not have bothered to lift a finger to help out Germany.
That's interesting.
You found honor in a place that you would not expect to find it.
Right.
But this tripartite pact was theoretically Germany, Italy, and Japan had an agreement. If somebody attacks one of us, we're all in it. We're going to protect each other. That's what mutual defense means. So mutual means it goes back and forth. The feeling's mutual. Yeah.
Mutual admiration.
The Mutual Admiration Society. Yeah. Okay.
I think
So
that's very clever of you to use that.
why, thank you. I only got it because of your cleverness.
Well, I was inspired by the inspiring lesson you're giving.
All right, enough of the Mutual Admiration Society. All right, so what happens? So this became a pivotal time. So pivot, it means hinge. So we're kind of going in one way and suddenly we turned on a pivot. What happens when you turn on a pivot? You end up going a different direction. Now, how are these ideas arranged? My gut reaction, and I'm going to tell you my gut reaction because I don't want you to jump to the better answer right away. I want you to go with the not so good. I looked at things like when this happened, that to me sounds like a time word. And the previous paragraph was time. And we have Hitler now had no choice but to do this over the course of 4 days. So I'm seeing these time words. It was in this month. I am seeing some possibilities for time, but it's entirely possible that that's a red herring, that that's just coincidence, that that's not really what they're getting at. This doesn't really satisfy me because I'm not seeing a clearly this happened and then this happened and that this happened. I wanted to keep digging and look for some other possibilities.
Yeah, I'm seeing something different.
What are you seeing?
It is in time order, but I'm seeing that one thing caused another, and then that caused another.
Can you give me an example, please?
Let's see. Well, Japan attacked, America declared war.
Okay, good.
And then Hitler had to declare war on the United States.
Yes.
And then we got involved in the war. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and this is definitely a crucial concept that I would like you to have about how the Americans got involved in World War II. America was trying to stay out of it, mostly apart from giving supplies to the Allies. But they were trying to stay out of it. Japan attacked the U.S., so the U.S. immediately declared war on Japan. Well, because of Japan's treaty with Germany, Germany immediately declared war on the United States. Think of this in terms of a bar fight. You spill your beer on me, I'm going to punch you. That's going to make your friend punch me.
And it makes sense on what you said earlier, because you kind of said anytime it's cause and effect, there's going to be a temporal element in the background.
Yes.
Because you're following the dominoes falling.
Yes, things happen in time. There is no way the effect can happen first or at the same time as the cause. The cause always has to happen first. All cause and effect relationships have some element of time involved, but not all time relationships have cause and effect. And when you are deciding on your GED test, how are these things arranged? Go with the one that is more specific. Time, this happened and then this happened and this happened. That gives you really the least amount of explanation. Cause and effect, there's a lot more depth in the claims that are being made. But yes, I definitely see cause and effect there. The next thing that happened, well, Allies started getting assistance because of the US's involvement. And that led to the war taking the course that it did. This last sentence, without U.S. involvement, it may have had a different outcome.
Alternative effect.
Yes, alternative effect. If this cause hadn't happened, it's very possible that there would have been a different effect. We don't know because that never happened, but it's definitely possible. So that's really the one that I'm going to go with. When Japan attacked the U.S. declared war on Japan. Germany had to declare war on the U.S. Isolationism now ended. Allies in Europe finally got the help they needed from the U.S., and that stopped the Japanese and German expansionism. Question, well, where are the clue words? There weren't any clue words. We certainly didn't have the really obvious and as a result, or because of, or therefore.
Right.
Just because you don't have the clue words doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. Keep that in mind. What that means is that when you are trying to figure out how information in a paragraph is organized, you can't just follow cookbook procedures. I gave you a lot of cookbook procedures in this lesson. You know, let's look for the clue words, let's make our decision then. But when you get into real life, you're going to have to be a lot more discerning in how you're working. An advanced chef is not just going to follow a cookbook. He's going to start using his judgment as well.
Now it is time to practice on your own. Go to your TABE Mastery Level e-reading book and complete pages 52 through 59. Then please complete the skill check for the entire unit on pages 60 through 62. The written work for Lesson 3 is worth 1 hour's credit. The skill check for the entire unit is worth another half an hour's credit. You'll also receive credit for 1 hour and 15 minutes for watching this video, provided you answer the control question to prove that you watched it. The control question is this: what was Admiral Nagumo criticized for after the Pearl Harbor attack? Rewind the video if you need to. You can write your answer anywhere on the homework that you'll submit, but make sure it's clearly labeled control question. You could write it on a blank sheet of paper if you prefer. You need to answer the control question to get time credit for watching the video. Don't lose that time by forgetting to submit the answer. For bonus credit and some writing practice, which you will need to pass the GED, write a paragraph that answers the following question. This is worth another half an hour's credit. The question is, do you agree with Admiral Nagumo's decision to leave Pearl Harbor and head back to Japan before all the objectives were met? Why or why not? I encourage you to do some online research to support your position. If you go to Google and type Nagumo Pearl Harbor in the search bar, you will find all sorts of links. Organize your ideas in the way that you feel is most appropriate for your argument. For example, chronological, cause and effect, order of importance, compare and contrast. If you turn in everything, that means the exercises found on pages 52 through 62, the answer to the control question, and the bonus paragraph, you can earn 3 hours and 15 minutes credit for this lesson.
You can turn your work in by hand to your instructor, or you can take pictures of it and email them to pcatlearnlabs@sc.pima.gov. Again, the mission is not completed until you've actually landed the plane on the carrier.
Can I FedEx it to you?
If you wish to do that, you can. That is a lot more expensive than emailing it, but go right ahead. Any questions on that? I think we are done. It is lunchtime.
Dismissed.